So this is my head that's completed. I've put the cotter pin joint in at the bottom, obviously with the pin sticking out here. I've put position eyes in here because I'm going to sculpt some sockets for the eyes before moving on to doing the nose. So I've made the assumption that you already know how to make the sockets for the eyes, but just in case you don't, I've used position eyes to mark where I want the eyes to be. Always a good idea to have a look at it from the front, from above, from the back, and also underneath. Now these are just sticking out a little bit because I've already marked them with a little bit of marker, if you can see that right there. So I'm going to go ahead and make those sockets. So what I've got on my needle, I've got quite a long thick needle because it needs to go through the hole of the muzzle there, is some whipping twine. Whipping twine's really good and strong. They use it to make sails, so obviously it has to be really strong. I've only ever once actually broken a piece of whipping twine. So what I'm going to do is put a couple of knots in the end. Here we go. And just tidy that off at the end. Trim it off. So where I've marked my eyes, I'm going to go backwards and forwards. So I just move some of the fur out of the way. This is string mohair, probably not the best mohair in the world to demonstrate on, but I think you can probably see it just there. So I'm going to go in through that one and out through the other side there, and the other marker. And pull it through. This has got a waxy feel and it's quite thick, this twine. And then I'm going to go back through the one I've just come out of and come back out the other side. Like that. Just pull it so it's tight, but we're not pulling it tight because we don't want to do it just yet. We're going to go back through the hole we've just come out of and back out very close to the dot, avoiding those gusset seams. We don't want those, otherwise it will rip through. So pull it through. Okay, and now I'm going to pull. And as I pull, it starts to form a socket. The dip in there. Don't know if you can see that very well. So I'm just going to do that a couple more times just to stabilize it, and then I shall finish off through the bottom of the head. So to finish, as I said, back through the hole and coming out at the bottom of the head as close to the cotter pin joint as I possibly can. Because it's been through so many times and it sticks and it pulls the stuffing on the inside, you can just quite simply just snip it off. So I now have my eye sockets. What I'm going to do is I'm going to trim around my eye sockets, put my position eyes back in before we then go on to the nose. Don't know if you can see that now. I've taken the string mohair away from the eye socket. I've put the position eyes back in, and now those are sitting nicely in the sockets. But obviously we've got all this mass here, which we don't want when we're going to think about doing his nose. So what I always suggest when I do noses is to trim a little bit of it back to start with, thinking about how big you want the nose, because you can always take a little bit more off. You can't add it in, unfortunately, and I've tried. It doesn't work. There are different ways of doing noses. This is just my way of doing noses. There are many other bear makers and bear artists who use different ways of doing it. Each way is individual to them, and it's just whatever you find easiest. So I'm just going to go ahead and trim the nose area. Okay, I've plucked the nose quite a bit. I want him to be quite bare around the nose. I will be taking more off around here. And as you can see, his nose is already starting to take shape. What I should say to you is the nose here is really firmly stuffed, and it needs to be so that it doesn't go all soggy when you actually come to embroider the nose. But basically that should keep all the hair out of the way for him, and we'll get on with stitching the nose. So in preparation to sew the nose, what I've done is I've just brushed his fur backwards, so I've got a good clear run at the nose. I've also got some quite long needles, 3.5 inch, and those are 10 centimetres, which is about 3.5 inches as well. I always keep a good stock of needles in, because usually you can do a couple of bears with one needle, and at the end of that it'll be well and truly bent and won't be as sharp. Depending on the fabric that you're using for your bear depends on how thick your needle needs to be, also on the size of the bear as well, again, because you don't want a very thick needle going through some very fine fabric, otherwise it'll leave big holes. You also need some nose thread. Now there's lots of manufacturers for this. Again, depending on the type of nose that you're going to be doing, the size of your bear, whether you want it to look quite neat and small, or whether you want it to be big and chunky, depends on the type of thread that you'll use. This is a very sort of fine cotton. I actually buy this when I go out on holiday to Turkey. They have some fantastic sewing products out there. They do a lot of their own sewing. It's very, very similar to the Anchor size 12 thread, embroidery thread that you can buy on a spool, but it's several times bigger than that. That's another one that I also use, is the Anchor. However, you know, you can use ordinary embroidery floss, although I find it tends to fur up a little bit. But again, choice is yours. So what I've actually done is I've threaded my needle with some of the embroidery floss. I've done it double, but that is double as in around the needle there, and those are the loose ends. I also have in my kit this little thing that's probably coming at you the wrong way, but it is actually a prim trick marker. Now I love this purely and simply because it dissolves afterwards, so it doesn't leave a mark on your fabric, and it's really important when using particularly light fabric. So what I'm now going to do, and I hope you can see this, is I'm going to make roughly the shape of where I want the nose to sit. I always start off with a rectangle. Can you see that there? I hope you can. Okay, not very straight. Done at a slight angle here. I would normally take a little bit more care to try and level it all up, but you know what, we can do that with our stitching. So I'm just going to pop the lid back on the trick marker, and then we can start to sew. So the way that I do this, and this is just my way, is I come at it from underneath the head here, so in from his chin, and I leave the ends. And what I try to do is come up to the centre there where I've put the line in. I don't pull it all the way through, and I will put my thumb on that bit to start with to hold it in. I then start to create a small cross into the nose. So going in at an angle there, hope you can see that. Sorry, fingers are in the way. Don't pull it too tight at this stage. And then I'm going to make a cross going over the other side and come up through the point of the first cross. And I'll show you why in a moment and what that looks like. So can you see that? I start to pull that a little bit tighter. Now, there's lots of people who use templates, who use needle felt here to bulk up, but I find this is really, really simple. So I've actually now made the 2 crosses. I pull that through. So he's got 2 crosses on the end of his nose. Poor little thing. And now I'm going to just pull it a little bit. And if you can see, that started to create a little bit of a ridge. That might just be out of focus slightly. I'll try and hold him steady for you. Okay, looks very unsightly at the moment. I'm now going to go back over my other cross, because I'm going to pull this one tighter. And it's created a ridge. Can you see that? Very slightly on this one, but it started to create a ridge. And I'm going to go back into my cross. It doesn't matter if it doesn't land on the crosses, because all this is going to be covered with thread. There. So from there, I will start to do satin stitch, which, if you don't know your stitches, that is just simply over and through, so they line up next to one another. I'm just going to take a moment or two just to do that piece, and then I'll come back to you. As you're stitching, if it does get tough to get the needle through, because it will get tough, little tiny pair of pliers work wonders for pushing that needle through. Another reason for having a long needle. And then just pull it through. That helps. Okay, I've done a few over stitches, as you can see there, over those crosses. Hope you can see that okay. That's his side view. There. The thread is still attached because we haven't finished yet. That's a view from the top. That's for the view from the front, and also I like to have a little look underneath and see how straight it looks. This is also the time when you can start to straighten this piece here if for any reason it's a little out of shape, or you put a little bit more stuffing one side than the other, etc. So I've decided that I am going to make his nose come down, I think, at either side and also in the middle. So the way that I'm going to do that, I'm going to get my trick marker again. You'll notice that the trick marker has disappeared already. But the way I'm going to do this is I'm just going to draw that on so that I know where I want it to come to. I just put dots because I just find it easier to work with. I hope you can see that. Just put that back together. Now the reason I work with a head like this is it's much easier to handle rather than it being on the bear. Believe me, when I first started bear making, I tried to do noses on a fully jointed bear. Not a good idea. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is start to try and create the sides of the noses, and I'm coming down. Don't worry if you decide that actually this isn't right, it doesn't look right, and you need to take your time to get your noses right, because it's an integral part of the bear and what gives them their charm. You can always use a razor blade or a scalpel blade to actually slice through the stitches and then just simply unpluck the strands of thread with something such as a really small pair of pliers. Okay, so you can see how that's starting to take shape there, and it's coming down. That was coming down to the point where I put the dot, as you can see there, I think. Okay, I'm just going to go ahead and do the other side. So I've done the other side there to try and match. If you look carefully, you'll see I've got some wonky stitches up here. It's a bit wonky there, but that's absolutely fine, you know, because what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just over sew, tuck those stitches in, make a nice neat finish across there, and I'm also going to have to put some more thread on. generally tend to like to use a small amount of thread to start with, and then I can always put more on, doing it exactly the same way as before with that piece underneath, because I'll show you how to get rid of that in a moment as well. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that, and I'll be right back to you. So welcome back. I've now tidied up my little nose. Okay, this thread is in the centre. You can see it sticks out quite a little bit there. Probably better if you see it across the back of my hand there. So I'm quite happy with that shape. I know we've got a few little hairs hanging about, but we will trim those off. Now is to decide about his mouth. Now I decided I want to bring it down like that and then do something with it. And this is really going to start his sort of character coming to life. One of the things I do like to do is use some pins. Hopefully I've got a couple of decent coloured ones. And this just helps me to decide where I want the mouth to be. And does it look even? So I put one in where I sort of want the nose to come down to, so that I can do that. I class this still as part of the nose. Where I want his mouth to come to, and this will also help to determine the kind of look he has. So at the moment I've put the pins there. I'm just going to wrap the thread around just so that we can actually see. Oh, and there's his little mouth. Now I might decide I don't like that, so I'll take those pins out. That's quite simple. I might want to give him a wide mouth. So again, it's about putting the pins in the right place. Before we start this piece of work, decide exactly where we want that to go and the kind of look we're going to give him. And that's a much wider mouth. If you can see that. And also by doing that, you get an idea of what his little character's going to come out like. Okay, I'm just going to go ahead now and just play around with those pins, and then before I stitch that bit, I will turn the camera back on. Okay, so I've had a little play around. That's the kind of look I want to go for because it looks quite sad. So I'm just going to go ahead and stitch that. What I have actually done off camera is actually to bring the thread underneath the nose. It was previously over the top. I've decided I now want it to come underneath. I want his nose to stick out more. So I'm now going to go ahead and sew the mouth part. If you could see my needle, you can see that it's well and truly bent. That's had a fine old time doing this nose. So I'm just going in there at the first pin, out at the second pin. You can see that. In at the first, out at the second. I take his pin out there. So that's the first part of his nose. I'm then going to go underneath that stitch. And I will go in to what was the third pin. Going into the third pin, I'm going to come out of where pin number 2 was, so that's across the mouth. Pull it a little bit. And actually I'm going to just go back up through to the nose. There's my pliers. It's tough getting back through this nose. And that's just as it should be. Sorry about the bang on that. That will have been worse on yours than it has been on mine. Got a little knot. That's no problem. Just pull that through. There we go. Don't want to pull it too much. Oh, quite sad. Right, all we do to finish off is we go over the nose maybe a couple more times, I am probably going to have to use the pliers to help me with that. Go in and out. If she can ever pick it up. And this needle's definitely seen better days. Sometimes people like to go over the sort of the bit that goes between the nose and the mouth a couple of times, and also around the mouth a couple of times. It's really down to your personal preference, size of bear, colour of bear and everything else, so that really is your decision to make. And I think this needle, if I can get this through one last time, it's going to be bye-bye needle and hello new one, because this is well and truly had it. Okay, one last time, finally in, and all I'm going to do to end off is put it down the back of the nose. It will come out down here, she says, not down there because it's bent. There we go, it's coming out at the bottom, you see that? Just going to pull that through, pull it nice and tight, very small scissors, and snip it off. Okay, that's going into the bin. Okay, now I did say that I would leave this here hanging round, and the way to get rid of that now is because that's your loose ends from when you started the nose off and when I started a second thread off. So all I'm going to do there is pull it nice and tight, take a tiny pair of scissors and just snip that off, and do the same with the other one. Just pull it, give it a bit of tension. Okay, as it is, they seem to have worked back in quite nicely there. I can still see a tiny little bit. All you do is you take the wrong end of a larger needle and just gently sort of poke it through. It's perhaps a little bit too big, but you can see it disappears. And there's his nose. Now, if your stitches are a little bit uneven, or you can see some marks and things like that, just get yourself a permanent fine marker pen and just cover those bits in. I'm just going to do that, and I'm just going to show you what that then looks like, because again, when you work on a very light fabric, it's very hard because you've got such a contrast between the two. It just helps to even it out. And there's his little nose. Hopefully you can see that. It's not too bad. I'm trying to move it to a slightly different area so you can see. And from the side profile, yeah, we've got a few hairs, we need to snip those away. So then your nose is ready to do whatever you want with, whether you decide to wax it, leave it as it is. I like to leave them as they are, but I'm going to snip off some of those little tiny hairs because I don't like those around. You can also use your little tiny pliers to actually pull those hairs out if you have the patience to do that. But it's definitely worth investing in the time to make your nose the best you can. Also, if you want to make that nose a little bit scruffy, that can also easily be done by just snipping or slicing a couple of those threads there. So he's got a little thread of his nose hanging upwards. Makes him quite a scruffy little bear. Then he's ready for his ears. I always do that next before attaching it to the body. I haven't sewn the body pieces together yet, but when I've done that, I will show you what the finished bear looks like. Thanks for watching. Hope you found it useful. Remember, this is just my way of doing it. I hope it helps you.